Please welcome a partner session with Cognitos.
Shall we start?
Let everybody kind of settle in.
Hey guys, can you hear us in the back?
Sweet.
Cool.
All right, start us off.
Show of hands. How many of you are developers? Cool. Okay, I have good news and bad news. Good news is that your job is going to get much easier very soon. Bad news is that the people who didn't raise their hands might take your job. So I'm Benny Gill, founder and CEO of Cognitos, and I've been a developer like you guys for 30 years, and learned a bunch of languages, built a bunch of products, and 3 years ago, I was taken aback by a question a teenager learning Python asked me. He said, "This computer, why is it not as smart as Alexa?" And I was like, first of all, that question doesn't make sense. It's like, but it's like, what does it mean? You know what it meant? It's like the thing in the kitchen is much smarter than this thing that is making me type Python. And like, but both are computers, so where are we missing the link? And anyway, so that's what started this journey. I realized that after so many decades of us, like 7 decades, we've been working as a society, forcing humans to learn the language of machines. We're just doing it wrong. You know, humans want the machine to speak their language. Why are we forcing us? So this is like dark ages. In the dark ages, literacy was very low. Today, we are at computer science literacy of 0.5% in the world, and it isn't improving. No amount of, coaxing people to go into school and learn stuff. It's not going to happen. We're in the dark ages. 1 in 200 people know how to teach a computer something new to do. Yet, all of humanity depends on computers. You have one computer in your hand all day long. You depend on it. All businesses, if they have to change a single thing, they have to change something a computer does. So imagine the 100% dependency on computers, and yet a fraction of people who raise their hands able to make that change in the world. That is dark age. So you have to get out of the dark age. The only way is not to develop another language and teach people. We already have that language, natural language. That's what we want to build. We have to make sure there are no developers in IT. Everybody else who didn't raise their hands should be able to do stuff. And this is where I felt that Jim, who is a CIO, 30-year experience in the industry where I have deep
Are you saying I'm in the dark ages?
No.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
You will teach us about all the complexity in supply chain, and IT has to deal with that. So why don't you talk about what has been your experience in the last 30 years? What have you seen? And what do we need to do about it?
Sure. Yeah, so as Vinny just said, I've spent 30 years developing IT systems in the global supply chain space. And before COVID, most of you never heard of supply chain or logistics. Like, I would go out to dinner, explain what I did, nobody cared. And once we hit through COVID, everybody wanted to talk about supply chain. Why are all those vessels sitting off of Long Beach? And so the challenges of trying to bring together all of the information across the supply chain to understand where product is at any given moment is still very, very challenging. And so, from the standpoint of trying to bring this information together, I'll give you a great example. Think about the airline compared to international transportation. So those big ocean containers that bring all the product in that you're buying, compared to an airline, you go on to Kayak or United and you say, where's my plane, or when's it going to arrive or land? And you'll get the same answer in each of those apps. In global logistics, that's not the case. We'll get information. So our company, Century, we're a global logistics provider. Our job is to be at every origin port around the world with the people, the warehouses, the technology. We have a platform called Visiv that manages all of the supply chain processes. So we've got to be there to orchestrate all of that. But we're dealing with these challenges today, and it's still happening where you don't know necessarily when a vessel is going to arrive at a port. You could look on 3 different sites and get 3 different answers. And so while earlier today we've heard all different conversations around AI and tech, there's still a lot of challenges in the industries, especially in supply chain, to really apply this technology. And so Vinny and I are going to talk a bit more about this now, but the technology and what Cognitos is building is empowering us to be able to bring all of that data together in a much easier state.
So Jim, tell me about, in your business, I mean, there's so many things. Like when somebody manufactures something in China and shows up on my doorstep, there's so many pieces in the middle, and humans are there pushing paper sometimes. So how much of manual labor is involved in your business, and why is that the case?
Yeah, it's still substantial. And so if you were to look on LinkedIn, there's a few companies out there that would say they've disrupted the whole industry and solved it. It is not the case. The problem is there's thousands and thousands of players. So we manage imports for some of the largest retailers, e-commerce players, Amazon, QVC, Specialized Bikes, people like that. And they're all dealing with many, many thousands of vendors, hundreds of transport providers, and everybody's talking in their own language in essence. So you could have a standard document like a bill of lading to move these goods, but each of those providers has a different variation of that document. And so we've tried to apply just straight OCR to that in the past, but when you've got so many variations, it doesn't make sense. And so the solution previously has always been to apply people to it. And so offshore teams or teams in Asia that would actually look at these documents and make sense of them. And so, yeah, so that's what we've been dealing with as an industry, is just the lack of standards and so many players.
So I'll tell you from my experience in software, the way software is evolved is you have like a happy path, okay, this is what I want to do, and you don't like too many variations. You write it, and then anytime you find one case, that's the edge case you forgot, you put it in the code and all that, and slowly the code gets more and more complex. But in industry like yours, even that is not viable. And that's why humans are coming in. So the question is, why are humans better than machines at dealing with all this variation? So I'll give you an analogy to make the point clear, and that is where technology is going. And that's what we are trying to bring. Take the case of a pilot of an airplane. The program they get is the flight plan. And this is what I want to do. And the pilot looks at that and says, okay, good. Gets into the plane and starts flying the plane. Now, many things can happen, many things can go wrong. Imagine how many edge cases are there in an airplane. There's a big fat book that the pilot knows that he can open anytime something is blaring or whatever. If that book doesn't have the solution, you call the control tower. If the control tower cannot help you land on the Hudson, right? The pilot knows how to deal with this stuff. If a developer was doing that, this is how it would go. You get a flight plan and say, oh, this, if one engine is wrong, not functioning, you need to do X, Y, Z. So it's like start the engine. Oh, if the engine is not working, do that. That code gets inserted, okay? And now another thing happens, that code gets inserted. And over time, these million different things that can happen is entering your flight plan. And the developer is saying, well, now I have done it. And then somebody comes and says, from the business side, say, you know what, hey, I want to change the flight plan. And the developer is like, what? So I have put in 1 million lines of code, and now you want to change it? And that's the problem in IT today. Business processes are actually simple. That's the flight plan. Like, I want to process an invoice, a bill of lading, a purchase order coming in, onboard a new employee. I want to put this thing in my CRM. Simple stuff. But the infinite combination of things that can fail is where the developers come in and they put in a lot of effort. And it gets more and more complicated. Over time, it just gets harder and harder. So what are people doing? So you say, let's have humans do it. There are hundreds of thousands of people today that are doing things manually, and now we are sitting in the beginning of getting out of these dark ages, where humans don't have to do these boring stuff because some developer does not want to do stuff proper, in this proper manner. I was thinking, what's the solution? The solution is what we do in the flight plan, or even in my car, there's a manual. The happy path is in English. Step 1, step 2, step 3. You want to change your oil? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Yeah, I mean, if something bad happens, your car is on fire, I'm not gonna put it there, right? That's in troubleshooting guide. So we need a system for automation where the main procedure is first of all in English. So a business person can come and say, I want to change the plan. My flat plan is different. They should be able to read what it is and change it. With all this generative AI technology, we built an interpreter for natural language that can run English as if it was code. So that's one thing you need, we have that. Second thing is this interpreter needs to be different than any other interpreter that's been built in the last 70 years, where it says, if there is a problem, that unforeseen thing, instead of blaming the developer and say, hey, you need to go to school and think more carefully before writing code, it pauses and says, let me look up the troubleshooting guide. And maybe in the troubleshooting guide for this scenario, some business person told me what to do, and I'm going to execute that code now. Once I've done that, I come back and I continue. So that kind of interpreter is needed. And once you do that, you are enabling this next generation of automation languages and technology. So, many decades ago, we jumped from punch cards, assembly language, to symbolic languages like COBOL and Fortran, all of C, C++. That was a big jump. Now we are sitting at another revolution where we are going from these deterministic, very hard-coded languages, computer languages, which only very few people in the world understand, to natural language as a means of automation, given this new kind of interpreter that comes in and helps people, doesn't force people to think upfront. Like when I'm coming up with my plan for my business process, I don't have to think about the million things that can fail. And million is an understatement. I mean, in real life, if I say, go walk from here to that door, infinite number of things can come in my way, right? But if you force me to write a program, I'll write a very simplistic program, right? But humans handle this complexity on the fly. So we need to build a system that does that. And the moment you do that, now you enable automation in businesses that can go beyond what traditional automation did. So that's what we are saying. What's your experience in this space?
Yeah, and let me just take it back to the tech side for a minute. So when I think about enterprise software development, what you were saying before about the user guide is really true. So the software developers end up building more and more complex code. And so when something goes wrong, now you've got to raise a ticket to go figure out what the code does before you can even start to solve it, right? And so you've got this iterative loop going on that's going back and forth between the business. The business just wants a simple thing. I just want to change this, right? And yet they've got to go through this whole cycle to understand, okay, what was it to begin with? What do I need to do? And so Benny, I think what you're talking about is this idea of being able to encapsulate that and have this separate layer that the business can interact with. So the IT organizations can develop these applications, and then the business can tweak or adjust how these applications run, and see it and have it documented so that they can go back. Because what happens if person number one makes that change and then somebody new comes into that job, right? There's no wait, how do they know what was going on? Where's that manual? It's there. It's in this technology to be able to come back and see, oh, here's all the things we did. And for me, that's critical because we have hundreds of customers. Every customer's supply chain is special and unique, and in their minds, it's perfect. And so as a logistics provider, I got to figure out how to make it perfect, right? And so this allows my business users, and before this technology, we were trying to train the business users to be developers. Hey, you've got to learn how to write SQL, or you've got to learn how to, understand, C# so you can know what this code is actually doing. That's crazy, right? And so what you're talking about is being able to open that up so that you've got an English engagement, like a language engagement with the application, no different than we have on our phones today, just in an enterprise class.
Yeah, I mean, people are using natural language in kitchen. Hey, Alexa, hey, Siri, do stuff. In businesses, you should be able to say, hey, here is my process document. Today, what people do is take that document and give it to somebody on the IT side. Hey, you have to go implement it. IT guy says, okay, maybe I need to get an RPA tool or some other kind of automation, and now I drag and drop and create these widgets. I mean, before IT existed, the business guy would talk to another human and say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the document. There's no dragging and dropping. There's like natural language and things. The difference between man and machine is machine likes to crash and burn and blame the developer.
Yep.
The human will say, hey, you didn't tell me about this. What should I do in this case? And that could be during runtime. That's extremely powerful because it takes the burden of thinking up front away from the business user, because business user really, doesn't want to think like a developer, right? You just want to, this is what we need to do, and when the problem happens, the business user is extremely smart at addressing that. They have a lot of experience. We need a platform that allows that to do.
And when you think about that too, the hardest part from a developer standpoint, and I started as a developer too many, many years ago, is that last 20%, that last 10%, right? Like that's where all the complexity lies. And so with this technology, you can do the 80% and then leave that last 20% so that the business user can define how to do this. And so like when we're working with this technology for document transformation, optical character recognition, it can be really hard to program for all these different variations of a document. But if you can put it in front of that operator, that business person, and say, tell me where this is, and then as a technology, I'm going to learn that and start using that, it's much easier than having a developer try to tell the machine that.
Yeah, this is basically, we need to humanize computers. I mean, that's the fundamental thing. I mean, we hear a lot about generative AI, what's it going to do? I mean, it's producing text like humans, but can it act like a human? And that's the next generation where we are going. And I feel that not just in supply chain, but all businesses that have paperwork, which obviously, as long as there's government, there'll be paperwork. Yep. And they're forced to do it. And there are always edge cases. The CFO says, yes, this is the rule. By the way, for this particular deal, there's an exception, because we want to do it this way. There's always exception in whether it's finance, whether it's HR, legal, IT. What we need to do is to enable the folks on the business side who know what to do when there's an exception with a tool that they can control. So they're getting more efficient. At the same time, the cost on IT, like Jim, your team,
right,
should not grow exponentially. Yeah. It's actually, the IT's job is governance, security, all the connections. That's setting it up.
And just to talk about that, the corporate governance side. So we're enabling these business users to adapt the application, but we're doing it in a platform where we can still manage and control it and see it. What's the alternative right now? If you walk into just about any enterprise organization, they get 80% of the way there, and then it's Excel, or it's some other technology, not technology, but some other solution, end user computing solution that some wizard came up with, and the organization doesn't know exists, right? So what we're talking about here is Cognitos enabling the business user with the power to be able to make the change that they need to do to run their operations, run their business, but still give the corporate governance that you've got it in one place, right?
Jim, so tell me, last question for you. So this is the state today. Where do you see your industry going in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said earlier, there's been a lot of talk of disruptors in our space, and I don't honestly think it's happened yet. And I think what we're seeing now with generative AI and AI in general will start to enable that. These challenges aren't going away. What I talked about earlier about multiple providers telling you different things about vessels or all these different document formats, they're not going to be fixed overnight. There's always going to be this need to translate and integrate data and to adapt to everybody's unique supply chain. And you can look at that in any business and say that same thing. Your customer's always right. You've got to figure out how to adapt to them, right? And so I think through these technologies, now we can start to really use them to empower those business users, and we don't have to teach them how to write SQL or how to write code to accomplish that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, any last thoughts on what will you do with extra time you get?
I'll be out on my mountain bike somewhere, racing somewhere in Virginia. But like, how about you? You got 38 seconds to tell us what is the next 3 to 5 years of
Well, I think
AI.
AI is changing the game. Everybody who can talk to a human and teach the human something new to do will think of themselves as a developer going forward. Because now machines are becoming more like humans. So if you can program, quote unquote, a human, you can program a computer, no difference. And what that does is accelerates innovation at least 100x. Because today, there are only 25 million developers in the world. So all innovation is funneled through that narrow thing, and of course, that's why they get a lot of money. And it's unfair. But at the same time, the rest of the world has all the ideas. So imagine short-circuiting that. Like if you have an idea, you can talk to a computer, change whatever the computer does, you can create your own business, run as fast as you want. That's going to happen. We're at the verge of that happening. That's a big disruption. But at the same time, we have to make sure we do it in a safe way. So humans have to be in control of what's happening. The way you be in control is you can read what the machine is going to do. Readability of code is the most important thing that we have in our hands. Even if the code was generated by AI, the human has to read it and approve it and say, okay, I like this, this will run. And when the human says this will run, it's running on an interpreter that's not going to guess its way, not going to put in biases and hallucinations. And that's the future that we are aiming for. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jen.
Good job.